The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe, adapted by Sue Ellis. True, nervous, very, very dreadful nervous that I had been, and am, but why will you say that I'm mad? The disease had sharpened my senses. It did not destroy them, or make them dull. Above all, my sense of hearing was acute. I heard things in heaven and in earth. How then am I mad? Listen, observe how calmly I tell you the whole story. It is important to say how I first got the idea, but once I did, it haunted me day and night. I had no reason. I loved the old man. I didn't want his gold. He had never wronged me. I didn't want his gold. He never insulted me. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was his eye. He had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it looked at me, my blood ran cold, and so very gradually I made up my mind to take the life of the old man and get rid of his eye forever. Now this is the point. You think I'm mad. Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I went about my work. I was so careful. I showed such foresight. I was so cautious. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. Every night about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it. Oh, so gently. Then when I opened it just enough for my head, I would put in a lantern. The lantern showed no light. Its sides were closed. I moved it slowly, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him lay upon his bed, and then so cautiously, for the hinges, I would open the lantern. One single thin ray of light from the lantern would fall on the old man's vulture eye. I did this for 7 long nights, every night at midnight, but the eye was always closed, so it was impossible to do my work, for it was not the old man who annoyed me, but his evil eye. And every morning when the day broke, I went boldly into the room. I spoke bravely to him, calling him by his name in a hearty tone, inquiring how he had spent the night. He had no reason to suspect that I had been looking in on him while he slept. On the 8th night, I was even more cautious in opening the door. The minute hand of the watch moves more slowly than mine did. Never before at that night had I felt my own power and wisdom. I could sacredly contain my feelings of triumph. There I was, opening the door little by little, and he was not aware of me. Perhaps he heard me before he moved on bed. Suddenly, as if startled, now you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was black as pitch, with a thick darkness, for the shutters were closed through fear of robberies, so I knew that he could not see the door opening, and I kept pushing it steadily. I had my head in and was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped on the side of the lantern, and the old man sprung up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed, listening. Presently I heard a slight gown, and I knew it was the gown of a mortal terror. It was the sound of fear from the bottom of the soul. I knew it well myself. Many a night I had felt those same terrors. I knew what the old man felt, and pitied him. Although I chuckled in my heart, I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise when he heard, and he had turned in the bed. His fears had been continuing to grow upon him. He had been trying to talk himself out of them, but he could not. He could feel, although he could not see or hear it, my head's presence in his room. When I waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I decided to open a little and a very, very little crack in the lantern, so I opened it. You cannot imagine how carefully until a single dim ray, like thread of the spider, shot up from the crack and fell precisely upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it perfectly clearly, all a dull blue. It had a hideous veil over it, and chilled the very center of my bones. But I could see nothing of the old man's face or body. For that I had directed a ray as if by instant precisely on that eye. And now have I had not told you what you mistake for my madness is only the extreme sharpness of my senses. Now I say there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound such as a ticking clock makes when covered in cotton. I knew that sound too well. It was the beating of the old man's heart. But even yet I kept still. I sacredly breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried to see how steadily I could keep the ray upon the eye. Meanwhile, the awakening drumming of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder. I say louder every moment. Do you hear me? Well, I have told you that I am nervous, so I am. And now the dead hour of the night, amid the awful silence of that old house, this strange noise began to terrify me. Yet for some minutes longer I stood still, but the beating grew louder and louder. I thought the heart must burst, and now a new fear seized me. The sound would be heard by the neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. But for many minutes the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not worry me. It would not be heard through the wall. Finally it stopped. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and I looked at the corpse. Yes, he was a stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it in many minutes. There was no beating. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If you still think I'm mad, you will think so no longer when I describe how I hid the body. The night was ending and I worked fast but in silence. First I cut the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs, and I then took the 3 boards from the floor and the room and hid the body parts. Then I replaced the boards so cleverly and carefully that no human eye, not even his, would have noticed anything wrong. There was nothing. He was out, no stain of any kind, not even blood. I had been too cautious for that, or a tub had caught all. When I ended my work it was 4 o'clock, still dark at midnight. As the bell sounded the hour there came a knocking on the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what I now had to fear. 3 men entered who introduced themselves as police officers. A shriek had been heard by the neighbor during the night. The neighbor had called the police and they had come to search the house. I smiled for what I had to fear. I welcomed the gentleman. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man I mentioned had gone to the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I told them to search well. I led them finally to his room. I felt so confident that I brought chairs into my room and told them to rest here. I myself boldly put my chairs upon the very spot in which I'd buried the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was totally at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerfully, they chattered. But soon I felt myself getting pale and wished they were gone. My head ached, and I heard a ringing in my ears, but still they sat and still chattered. The ringing became more distant. It continued and became more distant. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and got closer until finally I found that the noise was not within my ears. I now grew very pale, but I talked faster and louder. Yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dual, quick sound, much like a ticking clock's sounds when covered in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers didn't hear it. I talked more quickly, more emotionally, but the noise steadily increased. Why wouldn't they leave? I paced the floor as if excited by the conversation, but the noise kept increasing. What could I do? I foamed, I raged, I swore, I swung my chair and scraped it all on the boards, but the noise aroused again and louder, and continuously increased. It grew louder and louder, and continuously increased. And still the man chattered pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible that they didn't hear it? No, not they heard. They suspected. They knew. They were laughing at my horror. This I thought, and this I think, but anything was better than this agony. I could not bear those smiles any more. I feel that I must scream or die, and now again, listen louder, louder, villains! I shrieked. Pretend no more. I admit the I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here, here, it is the beating of the hideous heart of the old man. The end.